Hello, this is Kyle Matthews, Executive Director of the Montreal Institute for Genocide and Human Rights Studies. Very pleased today to welcome Sheldon Fernandez of Darwin AI to our talk on the coronavirus, seeing what's happening around the world in the way of human rights. And today we're very lucky. Sheldon has been a friend of Mig's for a while. He took our training program. I don't know how many years ago that was, Sheldon.
2014, 6 years ago.
2014, and then you joined us a few years later. We did a workshop in Montreal with tech
That's right.
looking at AI and dealing with extremism online. So it's great to connect with you. And so, Sheldon, maybe I'd like to get your perspective. You've been doing a lot of interesting work in the AI front, head of a company, but also interested in social issues and political issues. You gave a talk recently about the weaponization of media. And it ties to disinformation and kind of what place AI can play in this. So maybe I just offer you to start off with. Tell us a bit about your thoughts on this, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, I mean it's a fascinating topic, and the best way to frame it is I read an article recently that says when the government wants to control a narrative, and rogue governments in particular, they can either really restrict access to information and push their agenda in a very narrow fashion, right? So, I mean, North Korea would be the prototypical example of that. But the other tack that they're taking now with social media is when they don't want to obviously do that because of the, cosmetics behind it, they will instead flood the system with so much misinformation that it is difficult for the ordinary citizen to tell what's real and what's fake, right? And you see this literally around the world. And so the question is, given the raw amount of data that's being pushed by rogue actors and state actors, can we use artificial intelligence as a tool to try to at least combat some of this quote unquote misinformation? And that's where my talk kind of centered on at the University of Waterloo, because our chief scientist, Professor Alexander Wong, who's also Canada's research chair in AI, on the academic side, they've done some groundbreaking work to use artificial intelligence to detect fake news. And combining the two is just a natural interest for me.
So it's interesting because when we think about using AI to deal with fake news, we tend to think about large companies like Facebook or Twitter or YouTube that have algorithms that detect kind of hate or inauthentic information campaigns that are pushing false narratives or conspiracy theories. So we tend to think that it's all the responsibility of these large firms, but what you're saying is that actually smaller companies can play a role or could play a role perhaps in engaging with NGOs or think tanks or thought leaders.
I absolutely think that. And I think this also comes from the research community as well, right? The thing to remember with these large tech companies is, look, they usually have good intentions, but it comes from a certain perspective of, maximizing shareholder value, right? A good example of this is the YouTube recommendation system. So somebody did a study of how YouTube's recommendation system works, and what they found is that it slowly starts surfacing more extreme versions of the content you're already interested in, right? And so, I can give a very kind of strangely humorous example. So I think, 4 months ago, I got into the strange place where I was watching videos of cops arresting other cops. It was just fascinating to me, right? Because the psychology is, I have a cousin who's a cop, and if you pull over another cop, he flashes the badge, you just let it go, and it's the unsung, code between them. So I found it really fascinating to watch those strange videos. There's rare exceptions when they wouldn't follow that protocol. And what I found was, slowly but surely, the content got more extreme. At first it was arrests, then it was gunfights and so forth. And so if you ask yourself, what is Google in this case trying to do with this AI? They're trying to keep you on the screen as long as possible, right? So that they can maximize the amount of advertising you're exposed to. And so yes, big tech can play a role in this, but you need neutral actors, smaller companies, research institutions working in concert with organizations such as yours to provide what I would say is a non-commercial perspective, right? That's not tainted by the pressures that a very large company would have.
No, that's interesting because I had the same, I do work on extremist groups, and I've started to see, because I research like ISIS or groups in West Africa that are committing atrocities, and I start to get more intense suggestions by different platforms, including trying to push far right stuff at me because I guess, they think that I'm looking at this and getting radicalized. So it really is this is, I guess, a systemic issue that needs really more minds to come together and think about this.
Yeah.
I'd like to think more though about right now. We're dealing with this coronavirus. So global pandemic. You and I, our lives have been upended. We're forced to work from home.
Yeah.
Young children, it's very hard to do that.
Oh yeah, my son's going to barge in any moment. I'm positive.
It'll be like a BBC. It'll be like
Exactly.
a BBC moment. Don't worry about that.
Yeah.
But this is a case where misinformation or disinformation being pushed by different actors can actually be deadly.
Yes.
I spoke to Marcus Kolga, an expert on disinformation, particularly from Russia, and he was basically saying that, as you mentioned, there's so much information being out there, conspiracy theories, but also fake information on what will protect you from the coronavirus. And I'm wondering, how we can detect fake messages, but how do we detect like videos or audio recordings that are being sent to people via different platforms? To me, that seems like an enormous challenge, and I'm not sure how we can go about to do that with AI.
It's a real challenge. So there's two parts. So a lot of the work right now with kind of textual information, so an article you might read, the first level of this has to do with something called stance detection, which our group at Waterloo did some groundbreaking work on. And the idea is, given a claim in English, and then given a body of text in an article, can we use AI to figure out if the text of that article supports that claim, rejects that claim, or is neutral, or is, I think the other one is not admissible, or not relevant. And so why is that appropriate? So let's take something that's obviously false. Let's say we say that children cannot contract corona, as the claim.
Mm-hmm.
What I could do then is I could take that claim, I could source that with AI and check it across 1,000 news articles from across the political spectrum, right? So Wall Street Journal, Montreal Gazette, Toronto Star, Globe and Mail, and from that volume of data, a consensus should emerge if it's obviously false. And so the idea is this is a tool would allow a regular citizen, when they're reading something, to just see, like, is there agreement with the 5,000 articles that have been published on this? And if there's 3% agreement, well, then you probably know it's fake. Mm-hmm. If there's 97% agreement, okay, I can be pretty certain what I'm reading is true. So the thing with AI is we can combat data with AI, which is really good at analyzing data, right? Now, your question about video and audio, that's the next challenge, right? So there's these deep fake videos now, which are getting increasingly sophisticated, right? Yeah. So we can take a video of you and create a video that looks like how Matthew's saying that children cannot get corona. And so there are researchers who are trying to detect deep fakes using artificial intelligence. And it's a tit for tat between those who want to be nefarious and those who want to solve the problem. But at least we're trying, right? And Facebook has dedicated millions of dollars towards this, as have Google. So it's the start of something, but it's a challenge for sure.
No, but I think the issue of deepfakes are to me, I see that as something that we have to be really careful about, because I get concerned that if you could easily use some AI tools to create fake videos and make a political leader say something that everyone, if you drink tomato juice in the morning, you're going to be okay with coronavirus. Everyone go outside, and it can be a form of kind of asymmetrical warfare against society or a country. So it's really key. And I know also there's lots of online, you can do voice alterations now on Lyrebird. There's all sorts of platforms that one can go to kind of manipulate data and information to kind of create a series of, one doesn't know what's real or not. I mean, this is really
and so there's various solutions that people are proposing, right? Which is, you would let's say you record a video, you would imprint that with a digital signature the way you would your bank transaction. And that digital signature would let me know that it's authentically coming from you versus being doctored, right? There's blockchain, which people are trying to apply in creative ways to maintain the fidelity of something. So there are technical tools to combat this. I think only now are we realizing the scale of the problem, which is why a lot of researchers and nonprofit organizations are trying to spend time to address what is clearly a challenge.
No, and I think this is true. I mean, our work, we started off looking at mass atrocities and classic human rights cases, but with the emergence of digital tech and authoritarian governments that are using this on open societies, that we've decided we have to kind of start looking at some of these new issues, because they're not going away and they have a potential to have an extremely negative impact on human rights.
Yeah,
Freedom of
yeah.
speech, freedom of information. I mean, it's really a strange time that we're living in.
And the tricky part about it is that it's not as obviously nefarious as the things that we studied in 2014, right?
Yeah.
Where there's, clear examples of, human atrocities and so forth that are physical that you can measure, or you can see a government narrative, for example, in, Burma, that was clearly, documented and so forth. This is a little more subtle, right? You have a, flooding of information and hyper nudging in these terms that don't outright lie, but they draw people towards more extreme content so as to galvanize them or radicalize them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And detecting those is the challenge, and it's something that your organization is certainly doing well to start paying attention to.
Well, I find it interesting. You mentioned in your presentation, you mentioned the case of Rwanda, that the traditional media, the radio, was really the one tool used to kind of incite hatred and to inculcate among the masses over a long period of time this kind of
Yeah,
anger and resentment and racism towards one of the minorities in that
yeah,
country.
yeah,
What I find interesting now in 2020 is that you don't need to be a state to control the media. You can do that from a smartphone. It
yeah,
really has given a lot of power to non-state actors that can do this, or individuals. And to me, that makes it even more of a challenge, because you don't know who's behind some of these campaigns. You're not
yeah,
sure. And it
yeah,
also, it doesn't cost that much anymore in order to
yeah,
spread some of this hate. So
yeah.
we are, I think we really need to get creative in getting private sector and government and others to work together on this.
Yeah, and so I think the point you bring up about Rwanda is interesting, because I remember reading, and I think it was in the materials that you guys provided for the course that I attended. The challenge with Rwanda was that the radio was, in one direction, right?
Yeah.
People could not respond to the broadcast, and so there were many Tutsis and moderate Hutus that could do nothing but wait for death, essentially. And then we had Kenya, and I often use this as an example, the Kenyan election of 2008 and even 2012. When you had the violence in Kenya after the election, it was on text, it was on social media. It allowed voices of moderation to counter the radicalization elements that we were seeing. And the same thing applies to the open platform. So yes, somebody on Twitter can say something, somebody can say something on a tweet, and then in the comments, you can have 15 rebuttals in a matter of minutes.
Yeah.
So the openness of the platform is a challenge, I grant you that. It's also possibly the way that we can try to offset some of these very concentrated, voices that can be problematic.
No, it's interesting you bring up Kenya, because I know after the electoral violence in 2007, 2008, after that, the Kenyan government realized there was a problem. They set up a bunch of human, content moderators around the
Yeah,
election to look
yeah,
at, incitement to violence and so forth. So that was human moderation. Now these platforms do have these tools, but also there's a lot of, and we saw from Myanmar, you can create AI to look at certain languages, but we still haven't made a lot of progress in looking at other languages,
yeah,
smaller languages around the world, be it
yeah.
Swahili or others. So as some of these tech companies are focused in the West, we haven't caught up, or I guess created some of the AI tools that would be able to look at these different dialects and languages that aren't prevalent on the platforms, but are there.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember Susan Bennett, did a project. I think it was in Kenya in 2012, and differentiated between hate speech and dangerous speech. Right, dangerous speech being a little more a subsection of it that was more galvanizing. And the challenge she found, if I'm correct, was the indigenous language. There was so much nuance and so many dialects within the country. It was difficult to really translate what people were saying. And the other thing is, humans that want to propagate this are smart. So they then start using satirical speech and elliptical speech and these roundabout ways of talking that are difficult for an AI to pick up, but get the point across.
Yeah.
Now that said, the AI is becoming geometrically more powerful by the month. So you hope that we will start to have these tools that, will start to address this. But it's an ongoing back and forth, right, between the actor who wants to be nefarious and the engineer and consortium of people that want to prevent them from being nefarious.
So I have a question to pose to you, because you work in the private sector, you lead a company. You talked about sometimes the challenge between commercial interest or economic interest, but then also the challenge of corporate social responsibility, of doing good.
Yeah.
Do a lot of people that you work with in AI companies, do they think about these issues? Is it becoming more and more something that they realize, hey, like, yes, we're developing products to help commercial purposes or increase health, but is there a growing concern that, hey, disinformation, manipulation, online hate, is that something that people are talking about more and more, or are you one of the few
Yeah.
tech leaders that are thinking about this?
Right. No, I think people are talking about it more from the perspective of ethics, right?
Okay.
So when you build these systems, what is the ethical framework that you have in place to decide what they do and how they do it? So that there's a real awareness around that comes from, I think, the average citizen demanding now an awareness around the ethics of their data and so forth that probably wasn't there before, right? The Cambridge Analytica fiasco was, principal in that kind of awareness. So you see it from a different angle. I wouldn't say a lot of people in my industry are aware of the problem of radicalization and the weaponization of information. Some are, as a peripheral kind of concern, but it's really the perspective of what ethics do we bring into the designs of our system. Now, some of that is branding, right? Some of that is you want to be seen as the responsible corporate citizen, so you make some nominal ethics appointment and so forth. But a lot of it, is serious. There's a group called Partnership in AI, PAI, that's based in San Francisco. Our chief scientist sits on the committee. And, there's large companies there, Microsoft, Google, Apple. There's smaller companies like ours. There's research institutions that are genuinely getting together and are saying, okay, like, how do we come up with a fair standard for what the ethical expectations are behind these systems? Should there be an audit? I mean, so the work is starting, and I think most of it is rooted in the motivation to do good.
Sheldon, when you mention audits, so you're talking about what, public audits of algorithms? Is that what you're referring to, or?
Yeah. So just like right now, when if a company files taxes, you can get audited by the government or a third party entity. What some have proposed is that before you put a really critical AI system into practice, that you have a technical auditor who's looking at it, looking for boundary cases, looking for bias in data sets, which is a big problem. Now, look, it's going to be a while before we get there, but the fact that these ideas are being talked about and taken seriously is encouraging to me.
That is encouraging. I've done a little bit of work with Element AI, and they've been collaborating with the UN Office for the High Commissioner for Human Rights and Mozilla Foundation, and it's interesting to see there is a network of groups, private sector foundations that are starting to look at this. So I find that very in these dark times, there's something positive to look at. Maybe my last question for you, Sheldon, because I know your son or your child is going to come through that door anytime now, and we're almost at 20 minutes. If we put the AI thing to the side, there's another element of this, and one is about digital literacy. It's about yes, we can use AI to deal with fake information, and it's being flooded, and different actors engaged. But what is your view on the role of citizens in actually being a little more critical online, not believing everything they see? Do you think is that also part of a wider solution, like a public education campaign to actually teach people digital literacy skills?
I think absolutely, right? Because here's the thing: you can give people all the tools in the world, but if they want to believe a certain narrative, they'll believe it, right? I think of my father, obviously older than me, wonderful man, deeply spiritual, but these conspiracy theories that he comes up with, like he read, and hopefully he doesn't watch this podcast, but he read that the whole coronavirus was China stealing it from the US as a biological weapon, but it actually came out and like they didn't have the anecdote for it. And I remember thinking, like, Dad, like, where did you read this? And why are you inclined to believe this, right? Yeah. And it's almost like I had to undergo a bit of digital literacy education for him, right? Which maybe all children feel at some point with their parents. My son will probably feel like that with me in 10 years, 20 years, right? So yes, I think that's a point well taken, right? It's one thing to give people all the tools in the world, but to get them to use the tools and to bring a conscientious approach to appropriating information is incredibly important. And I think like your organization, the work we do at Darwin, and universities. Like that's partly why I gave the talk. It was
Mhm.
for the young students in the audience who, you know, are born in the digital world. They need to know now this is happening. This is happening. Like be careful of what you read and how you read it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fascinating stuff. Sheldon, I want to thank you so much for joining us, taking time out of your busy schedule.
Happy to do it.
And I hope we can have you on again. We're going to be doing a lot of these interviews because we can't be in a physical space. So hopefully we can have your voice and get your knowledge and hear from you in the future.
No, it's wonderful. One last thing, Kav, I just have a moment. Our company open sourced in conjunction with the University of Waterloo an open source neural network, which we called COVIDNet. And it's a neural network that can analyze chest x-rays and with pretty good statistical certainty diagnose corona. So I'd encourage people to just go to our website, check it out. We've open sourced it to the research community because we don't want to benefit commercially from this. We want to give healthcare professionals a tool to, you know, combat the pandemic. So just a note to your listeners and viewers out there, do check that out because it is an important initiative that we're trying to get started.
Well, thank you so much. We'll check it out, and when we put this on Twitter and on LinkedIn, on Facebook, and on iTunes for the audio component, we'll make sure we share that so others can have a look and see. That could be something useful to different health agencies in Quebec, Ontario, but also internationally.
Okay, wonderful. Well,
thank you very much,
good
Sheldon.
as always.